we wanted to talk also a little bit about leadership and what
hmm
it means to be a leader in this time. And I think there's some things leaders can do. We did talk about our own businesses and how we've learned to adapt, but leadership also has to adapt.
Coming as it does 30 years after the internet unleashed a massive wave of disruptions and 8 months into the COVID virus, 2020 can seem to be the year that everything changed and confusion reigned. That's not quite the truth. And in fact, it is up to leadership to maintain a sense of stability by returning to basics and looking at some of the tried and true principles and practices that make great leaders.
I'm going to say, is this the end of leadership? It depends on how you define leadership. My personal favorite definition is what a leader says happens. Now, there are many different interpretations. In fact, that's what I love about this, is it has a lot of different interpretations. But at the end of the day, a leader has to know that what he wants to have happen is going to happen. And many leaders struggle with that, either because they didn't hire good people, or they don't hold them accountable, or the outcome they want is really not very reasonable or not doable or feasible. But that's it. And obviously a leader needs to have some sort of an organization or followers, otherwise you can't be called a leader. But a leader has to be so good that what he wants to have happen happens. And that gets challenged when suddenly you can't see the people. And you can't use your usual way of motivating, even if it is yelling. Certainly Steve Jobs was a yeller. And I find it hard to believe that somebody who yells would do it here. For one thing, they can see themselves as they're doing it, and they may not be happy. But it's probably, as a management technique, well, first of all, very limited, but you do a lot of damage if you're not there, as we just talked about. If you're used to having a group and you can sort of fix things that you rat when you take people to task. But it really does make it imperative that you have the right team. Obviously, productivity is going up. If productivity is not going up, that is already a sign. So it just accentuates the things you need. You need to have core values that are understood by everybody, so that behavior patterns are already sort of ingrained. You need a strategy. You need to have done the strategic planning piece, because that is also a team building play. It's something that builds teams. You can do virtual retreats, virtual cocktail parties, something that sort of emulates somewhat face-to-face, but lets people relax and be with one another. So there are a lot of tools, but I think, the problem with leadership is that we all think it's about the outcome, and in many cases it is. But in many cases, that's not how the leader is being judged. One, because not everybody knows what the outcomes are that the leader is looking for, and he may have outcomes, or she may have outcomes determined by their board that a lot of people would question, but there are good reasons to want that outcome. What we see is literally what we see and hear. And the media is a perfect example of the way they judge presidents. It's all based on behavior and the communication. And that's really so important with leaders, is there are disempowering and empowering behaviors. Tolerance, for example, is a disempowering behavior, counterintuitively, because that's when you start letting people get away with things. You don't hold them accountable. So that would be an example of a disempowering one. Another one is being rigid, being authoritarian. It's where you're robbing power. So again, it just accentuates what it means, what's necessary to be accepted as a leader and to achieve that what a leader says happens. So you got to check your behaviors. And that also has to do with your mindset. Your mindset, it becomes much more important, because it's got to be pretty clear on being the sort of mindset that will get things done. And then obviously communication is key. And if you can't communicate it well and you can't get them to understand, and there are all sorts of little tricks that you do to do that, let's call them techniques. But you've got to be able to communicate. And of course, another counterintuitive part is, even in the most creative industries, the best communication is the repetitive communication.
So consistency, that's what I was going to say, is the consistency that builds trust.
Literally the words. We have 3 months to get this done. We have 3 months to get this done. That becomes something you say over and over again, because the more you hear it, the more you remember it.
Right,
So
and time starts ticking at that as soon as they say that, because then sooner or later it's going to be 2 months, and you don't start then. You should already be a month into it at that point, you know.
Exactly. So these are all best practices, which just become more important when you're working virtually.